I've learned this over the years, and I go back to my early time with Air Methods and getting the opportunity to teach mechanical ventilation. Right?
Yeah.
And I get asked to write a vent lecture for Air Methods and orientation, and I write this big ass vent lecture, and I send it out, and Alan Wolf sends it back with red pinned up
all over it,
and then he sends it to an RT, and he red pins it up. And it wasn't that my concepts were wrong. It was I was teaching at a advanced level. And I failed to understand that you've got to reach the 90%.
Yeah.
And that's not a negative thing, right? You're going to have in any organization, any genre, in any profession.
Yeah.
You're going to have 90% of your staff are going to be, you know what, I'm going to come to work. I'm going to do what I need to do. I'm a solid worker. I work hard. But they're probably not going to put in a lot of extra time.
Yeah.
And you probably have those 10% that are really obsessive about things.
Don't know.
And I probably fall into that obsessive, right? I think a lot of us do. That's a good thing and bad thing.
Yeah.
So are you trying to reach the 10%? Or is it better to reach the 90%? And understand that you have maybe the 10% isn't that they're more driven. Maybe it's just they're a more experienced set of providers.
Are you talking about reaching as far as educating?
Educating, yeah. So the key is the foundation is only as good as how you deliver the content. You got to start with the basics. Mm-hmm. They got to understand the basics before they can understand the intermediate level stuff and the advanced level stuff.
I agree.
And that was really the context of why everything was red pinned, is because I was teaching way, way above what people needed to know.
Well, I think it's easy. I was in education a little bit, but I think it's really, really easy to want to show your knowledge.
Sure.
As an educator, you go into a room of providers. I can remember the first lecture that I gave at a regional level, and to all of you who came to that class in St. Louis, I was very nervous. But being in there, I knew that there was a room full of people who knew what they knew, who were solid providers. And I was going to have to try to teach them something. And I did. But at the same time, I had to understand that you have to teach to not just the 90% and the 10%. You have to teach to the 100%. But at the same time, you have to teach the 90% in a certain way, and you have to teach the 10% in another way. And I think it's important as an educator to be able to find the right delivery method, I guess, is the way that I want to say it, to all of those people. And as an educator, you have to do that because it's your job to teach the 100%.
So I fully agree, and I think where I'm going with this, and this is where it might not be popular, is I think this day and age there's a level of entitlement, and I think ultimately whatever job you have, we have to try to become the best at that job. But I do think that there's jobs out there, and in the medical field, our job, nursing, physicians, nurse practitioners. There's another element to that job. There's a huge weight and responsibility that I feel like we need to understand. And there has to be a level of curiosity.
Yeah.
You have to understand and have self-awareness of what you don't know. And that's where I'm kind of going down this road, the foundation, right? You can have educators in your life that are going to teach you. Mm-hmm. But you need to understand really quickly that is just a glimpse of your learning potential. And you have to put in the work behind the scenes. And that's where I struggle. That's what's probably not going to be popular. You know how many times that I have sat down over the years, and this is just in general, and discussed ventilation or pulled a vent out or pulled a piece of equipment out. to come back a month later and have the same providers ask me the same questions. And one of the things that I always asked was, "Hey, did you pull the vent out over this last month?" "Well, no, and that's there's could be lots of reasons, right? It could be that you're busy. I would argue that everybody has 30 minutes in a shift.
Yeah,
30 minutes.
I agree with you. I think even from an educational standpoint, we have to teach the 100%. And like you're saying, like there's different segments,
right.
But at the same time, you have to be a self-starter.
You have to
be a self-educator. And I don't care if you want to be in the flight aspect of the industry, or you're still on ground, or you want to go to something else. It doesn't matter. Whatever you do, it can't be spoon-fed to you your entire career. It can at the beginning,
sure,
when you're a baby.
Yeah,
it can be fed to you, like milk. But eventually, you're going to have to determine, where do I find the resources that I need to learn from? And like you're saying, I remember my partner and I when I first got into the flight industry, and even before that, but I remember specifically in flight, we would pull out pieces of equipment and we would go over it and we would quiz each other on it, just so that we know what we're doing with that piece of equipment. Not even necessarily a concept in terms of a diagnosis. It's just a piece of equipment to get familiar with it. And then you throw a diagnosis and learning, because really there's how many we had lots and lots of protocols or guidelines, but in any case there were really only 15, 16 main guidelines that most patients could fall into.
Sure.
And I think more than just knowing your equipment, knowing your protocols, and saying, okay, well, this patient with this issue would fall into this protocol, and then being adaptable within that protocol, I think is important. And you have to learn that yourself. You can't necessarily be spoon-fed that. You can get an overview of it, but you have to know, what will I do when I get this patient?
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be a level of fear, and I think that's the thing that when I talk to new educators or individuals that email me and ask me about, they're frustrated, and I've felt these same frustrations. I think the thing that you have to understand is that your internal expectations for yourself, you can't put that same shadow on the people you're educating, because nobody is going to be the same. Nobody's going to have the same anxiety. Nobody's going to have the same fear. You might not understand that, but you've got to move past that, and you have to just figure out ways to present the material that they're going to be able to retain. I think my message is, for any of you out there listening, you've got to put in the work. I mean, you have to take accountability and understand what you don't know and seek that stuff out and learn it. It doesn't mean you can't go ask people. You can definitely email me. There's lots of different mentors out there that will help you, but ultimately you got to put it in the work. You got to put in the time. I'd say 90% of mechanical ventilation that I've learned has been learned from me using the vent, touching the vent, reading myself.
And it's a very tactile skill, though.
Yeah, I mean, there's no other way around it. And I think the thing that's so funny, and I remember doing HPS, this was way back, and, this is when you and I were together, and we set up this big ICU room, and this is a culture thing. This is a culture thing, and drive me nuts. And we'd set up this big ICU, and we'd have people come in individually, and you'd have a medic come in, and you have a nurse come in, or whatever, and you heard the same things. You'd say, all right, if you're going to give this medication, you need to set the pump up. And I would have paramedics. Yeah, I don't touch the pump. The nurse does the pump.
You do today.
And not even be able to turn the pump on, or not even be able to program the pump. And you'd have the same thing in certain circumstances with nurses. No, the paramedic does the airway. Or the paramedic usually handles the vent. And I think the important thing is the message is be well-rounded. Work on the areas that you're most uncomfortable with. glean information from your nurse partner or your paramedic partner and become one, right? Each discipline has amazing attributes that collectively I think is what makes that team, I think, a super team. But it comes down to just, if you don't feel comfortable on something, I have the self-awareness. If I'm teaching a topic, I've gotten to where I'm pretty good at hiding it. Like, people probably don't know it. But if I haven't taught something for a long time, so a great example would be endocrine, right? I never teach it. If I had to teach, Ashley would teach it, or, Bruce will teach it, or whatever. Mike teaches it. It's one of those lectures that I usually pawn off because I usually have more lectures. And if I have to teach it, I can teach it. But in my mind, when I'm teaching it, I don't feel comfortable. I internally am having to really process things really quickly, and it's not coming out like the other stuff does. Yeah. And so for me, it's a fear, and it's a self-awareness that I am not to the level that I need to be. And so you have to learn what that trigger is and understand that, hey, you know what? This flight did not go well because, man, I did not feel comfortable about that vent, or phooey, that did not go well. I was so stressed the whole time. Go right in and start studying that, and because you'll retain it.
Yeah.
Based on that stress response. So,
do you remember what my Achilles heel was? You probably don't. Every time I got a balloon pump patient,
they would arrest on him.
They would arrest every single time. And, that really bothered me for a little while, because I thought, well, maybe I just don't know what I'm doing. But to your point, I had to learn that myself. It's not something that I could go to somebody and say, download everything you know to me about the balloon pump. I had to go. I think that was almost a daily thing for me on shift. Is I'm going to get the balloon pump. I'm going to learn it and play with it. And those arrests weren't necessarily because I didn't know the balloon pump. It just made me want to be better and to try to prevent those arrests that were maybe inevitable, maybe not. But it was something that I wanted to learn and be an expert at. And so that's why I went and saw that information myself. But it was not fun. It was awful.
So funny.
I remember there were plenty of times where Eric would even be like, so you got another balloon pump, and they arrested again.
Well, I think honestly it was the first one you had two in like 1 week, and after the first one, I if you remember, I said, well, did you leave the balloon pump on? And you go, no, I shut it off. I'm like, well, leave it on and pull a lead off, and it'll go to pressure, and it'll actually, and you're like, oh my gosh.
It's like epiphany.
Yeah.
I mean, other than trying to do things yourself and learning to do things yourself, I think it is important to find a mentor and somebody that you believe and probably does know more than you do, and learn from that person.
Yeah.
Take from them all that you possibly can, and then like Eric is saying, put in the time. Try to apply that case over case over case and get better. But yeah, I did learn that, and it hurt my feelings a little bit that I didn't think of that first.
Yeah. So something I have had so many emails. It's something I have completely avoided discussing and talking about. I've talked about it in small groups. I've talked about it. I've never done a podcast on it, and it is one of those things that I have so many opinions on. I'm going to be very, very careful.
We have over 200 podcasts, and you haven't done a podcast on it.
No. So what is just culture to you?
Oh, I think just culture, it pulls up so many things in our minds. As employees, as especially, it's used all the time in medical, and it's almost a buzzword to the point that it has lost its meaning, I feel like. But at the same time, I feel like just culture is all of us learning from each other's mistakes. I really feel like at the heart of it, that's what just culture is.
Okay, so obviously we had the incident at Vanderbilt. This is the topic that I said I've avoided.
What incident do you mean?
and Redonda Vaught, we know that she did get convicted. If you haven't obviously heard this story, you must be under a rock, because it's been everywhere, right? So, read up on it. But obviously, she was convicted. She did not get jail time, which I would have to agree was the right choice.
I agree with that.
I think where I struggle with this whole thing is the concept. So that situation, I'm never going to sit here and say that I understand from the nursing side, because I don't. Mm-hmm. I have no concept, right? I'm not a nurse, never have been a nurse, don't want to be a nurse. I've worked as a tech in a hospital, in an ED, but I've never used these Pyxis systems, Epic or these other systems that are having them having these pop-ups and them having to get rid of those. I definitely think that there's a system issue that has been brought up, and hopefully these hospital systems will work on fixing that. I think I try to wrap my head around, from the nursing side and the nursing associations really taking a stance and trying to advocate for her, and being against really her even having been charged and the trial and stuff like that. Do you feel like this is going to shatter just culture? I guess that's the first question.
I don't feel like it should. I feel like most certainly that by what happened, kind of the sequence of events, I feel like in a way it's really going to change the way that institutions report.
Yeah.
Because from what I understand, and this is just reading things, I have absolutely no firsthand knowledge, Your Honor, of what happened, at that. But from what I understand, the institution didn't report nearly as completely or thoroughly or truthfully, I don't know, however you want to call it, as she did. And so I do think that because she self-reported and said, hey, this happened, it does call into question, what are we really doing with just culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge. I think there's been a lot of concerns raised about that across the industry. Is are people going to come forward and talk about mistakes? And I think there's been a lot of different podcasts. There's been shows that have talked about that exact thing. Are people going to be reluctant now to be honest if they make a mistake?
But one of the things about just culture is just because an organization practices just culture doesn't mean that there's no discipline.
Sure.
Within just culture, it means that we're going to try to learn. From my understanding of just culture, it means that an organization that practices just culture is going to try its very best to look at the organizational unit as a whole and find out what contributed to a failure, rather than saying this person on their own failed without any help from the organization.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't necessarily mean that there's not going to be some trickle-down effects from that, but it does mean that the first option is not to blame the provider. It means that we're going to look at this overall, we're going to talk about it, we're going to break it down, we're going to find out why it happened, and then at the end of that, there may or may not be disciplinary action that happens. It may be appropriate, it may not be appropriate, and I feel like that is just. It is.
Yeah, no, and I think you have to look at that from that standpoint of, is it, I think a lot of times most companies that I've been involved with, they're going to look at it from, all right, what did we do from a training standpoint? Was there a breakdown on our end that caused this escalation of mistakes or the end outcome?
Yeah.
And I think you have to, from a company standpoint, always look within and evaluate. And I know from the training standpoint, anytime we've had a Sentinel event at companies that we've both worked at, you got to look back at the training. Was there a breakdown in the training that caused that? I think from a just culture standpoint, really the only area where you probably have somebody that should be terminated is if it's a malicious, reckless type of behavior that was so out of the ordinary. A great example would be a pilot knowing they have to fly that aircraft at a certain altitude, at a certain speed, not going, not flying down in some canyons or,
that doesn't happen.
No,
right?
It doesn't happen. Doing something that is, against the GOM,
Yeah.
That's something that they know better. They absolutely know better.
Have you ever been in those situations where a pilot has knowingly?
Yeah, let's talk about it. Yeah, I mean, I think I remember back in early in my flight career, I was flying with a new pilot, and he made a comment. I mean, I was brand new. I mean, I didn't have maybe 8 months flight experience. He was new to the organization, had come from the military, and he said, we're flying right over the mountains, and it looked to me like we were headed for basically an altitude where the mountains came up. And he said, "Hey, watch this."
That's always bad.
Yeah. And if I remember right, he actually went and he went straight for him and last minute pulled up and came up over the top. Yeah. Which scared both my partner and I. We were headed for a scene flight. That's really the only time that I've had a pilot do something like that where it caught me off guard.
Yeah.
And I knock on wood. I mean, I haven't had circumstances where I've felt like things like that were pushed.
Yeah.
Now, has there been times where I feel like there's pilots, and I would say it's very far and few between. I think I've always been very conscientious about voicing my opinion on weather and stuff like that. Is there? It is funny. Pre-show, we were talking about a pilot, and both of us said his name at the same time. We won't bring that up, but that we both had the same experiences with that would push it all the time like that, and all the time. And so you had to be aware. Now, I would say from a pilot standpoint, phenomenal pilot from a skill standpoint, from the hour standpoint, from his background, stuff like that. The area, knowing the airframes. Mm-hmm. Talk about anal retentive, about meticulous. But,
absolutely.
But you could make an argument, and this is not defending him, that his comfort level was far exceeding our comfort level, but it definitely didn't fit the industry.
Sure,
right?
Yeah.
What we should be doing and the things he would say, and did not fit the culture that we were trying to put out. I'll say it that way.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you. Not just picking on the pilots, but have you ever? And I was sitting here as we were talking about pilots. I was sitting here trying to remember. Have you ever been with a partner who has pushed the limits of your comfort in terms of patient care? Now, keep in mind that at one point in time, I was precepting Eric. Now, I realize that probably should never happen, but at one point in time, I was, and I can say we probably pushed the limits a little bit there, but most certainly, Your Honor, within the safety of care. But have you ever been with a patient who has said, I really think we should do X, Y, Z, and you knew it was wrong, but because that partner pushed you into that decision, you went along with it, or have you always expressed?
No, I've never been. I've never went with something I knew was absolutely wrong. I think that's a dynamic that it's interesting to bring up, and we may end up putting this podcast out over 2 parts, but it's interesting, and this is funny. I think I look back at flying before brotherhood.
Yeah.
The dynamic of flying with a nurse that you've never met, you don't trust, you come from 2 different disciplines, can be very interesting until you build that relationship.
This has been a production of the FlightBridgeED Podcast, leading the way in pre-hospital critical care and emergency medicine education.